This is Kathryn, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about her before we got started. She's been married to her husband, Dave, for 35 years. Dave is employed in the, how do you pronounce that?
Palliative care.
Palliative care, I didn't know what that was. As a chaplain at Fresno Community Hospital. They have 2 grown children. Their son, Brian, is married to Audrey, and they are living near Atlanta, Georgia, where Brian has graduated with his PhD, my husband's a police officer, sorry, PhD in Hebrew Bible at Emory University. That's cool, that's really good. Brian is teaching at Morehouse College and at Emory University. Their daughter, Christy, lives here in Fresno with their 2 grandsons, Lincoln, Anderson, Philip Dixon, right? And Rocco Landon Davy Dixon. Okay, I like it. Anyway, she has been a certified birth doula with DONA International for 6.5 years and has been a part of about 145 births, including her grandsons. Oh, that's wonderful. She's a stillbirth doula, which is a birth and bereavement doula serving women in any trimester of loss. In her spare time, she likes to play with her grandsons, organize her house, and rest.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. I wasn't expecting Kelly to tell all about me, so the only thing I'll add is one of the fun things that I do with all of my clients that I get as a birth doula, and we'll go into all of that in a second, is after the birth of their child, they get to go through a big bag of beads. And this is all tangled up. But then it's added to my necklace to represent the birth of their child. So it's a fun way for me to remember every one of my kids. Okay. So how many of you have even heard of a doula? Okay, good. The word doula is a Greek word, and it means woman's servant. And if you think back to Bible times, who attended the births that took place? Women, exactly. Women were always the ones that tended to them. Men were out of the picture totally. So a doula is kind of like a personal trainer. I help families work towards their goals of having the type of birth that they would like. I do absolutely nothing medical. Nothing medical. I am there for a physical support, emotional support, and watch the monitors very closely because, as you know, hospitals are a very busy place. And so nurses typically have more than one patient that they're taking care of. And if the patient next door is getting ready to deliver, then they're not available to help their other patient. And even though there's other nurses on the floor, they still are responsible for other patients as well. So that's where a doula is really helpful because I can read the monitors. I can see if the baby's heart rate is going down, and all of a sudden I can say, Mom, get up, turn over, do this, do that. We've got to get that baby back on the monitor. So I basically support any couple in any way going through any type of a birth they want to, whether it's a natural birth, if they plan to get medication, or even if they plan to have a C-section, I can be there. I generally come to the hospital when they're in pretty active labor, and I stay until about 2 hours after the baby is born. So the last birth I just came off of was 36 hours. Long time. Long time. They slept, I didn't. But that's okay. That's okay. We got a healthy baby boy at the end, and that was all that really mattered. So births can be long. They can be very long. I'm on call 24/7. I never know when there's going to be a baby coming. And I generally will take about 3 clients a month, and hopefully they don't all come back to back, but that has happened. Okay, so a bereavement doula is a doula who performs the same duties that a birth doula does, but it's in the area of a loss and grief. So there can be bereavement doulas in all kinds of areas, but the area that I'm going to talk about is a birth bereavement doula. And a sudden loss to a family that's unexpected can create a mindset that the parents just can't think. They don't know what way to think. Their mind is just so jumbled up with the news that something devastating is going to happen to our child, whether they're born alive or whether they're born dead. They have to deal with that somehow. And so having a bereavement doula helps them walk through those steps of what they need to do. So pregnancy. Pregnancy can be one of the most exciting times of a couple's life. But there's always risks. There's always fears, and those fears can be real. Those risks can be real. The risk to a mother's body, suddenly putting on weight. How will her heart handle that? How will her lungs handle that? So there is always a risk for the mother when it comes to pregnancy, and we often don't think about that. We think about the risk to the baby. But mom is also in danger in many ways. It can affect their relationship in their marriage. If there's morning sickness, if mom's so tired she can't do anything. You've heard of pregnancy brain where they just can't think straight. Very common, very common. And if the pregnancy wasn't planned, it can create a financial burden within the family. Another area that there's change when you're pregnant is your body. How will my husband handle my changing body? And adding pounds? Even though I'm growing a baby, will he think I'm fat? Very, very common for women to feel. So the area that we're going to focus in on today is pregnancy loss, and there are lots and lots and lots and lots of pregnancy losses. But we're just going to look at 7 of them today. And these are the most common losses that you might hear about. The first one is struggling with fertility. It's not often talked about. A couple who is trying to get pregnant, they don't go around advertising it necessarily that we're trying to get pregnant because they're afraid of those comments. Are you pregnant yet? Did it happen this month? You guys just need to relax and go in the bedroom. Those things can be hurtful. They can create more fear. They can create guilt in a woman of why isn't my body doing this when God created women to have babies? So why isn't it happening? It can be an emotional roller coaster for the couple. Every so many days, I'm going to take that pregnancy test, and did it work? The pressure of trying to conceive within a block of time can create a lot of pressure in marriage. And whether you know someone is trying to get pregnant or not, just giving that couple loving support is what they need. Many times there can be anger within a couple because it's just not happening. And after several losses that a woman might have, she begins to think, will I ever have a baby? And if they need to turn to any kind of medical intervention, that will add probably a pretty high expense and a financial burden to their lives that they had not counted on. So those things can create a lot of stress. The most common pregnancy loss that we all hear about is miscarriage. A miscarriage, while they have different levels of miscarriage, it is a baby who is born who is under 20 weeks gestational age. A chemical miscarriage is when you're very, very, very early in the pregnancy. You may not even know you're pregnant. And you're so early that it's impossible for the Doppler to even pick up a heartbeat. And so all of a sudden, a woman starts her period or starts bleeding, and it can become very scary because all of a sudden there's a lot of stuff and gunk and you don't know what it is. Especially if you didn't think you were pregnant. You will lose a lot of blood, and plus the uterine lining, sometimes the gunk or the blob that comes out, you have to really look in it to see if a baby was even in it. Some women don't even realize it and flush the toilet and it's off and it's gone. Things that I hear people say when they've had, or to people who have had a miscarriage is, well, you know, God just needed another miracle or another angel. This wasn't God's will that you have this baby. And you know, it really wasn't a baby after all, if it was very early in the pregnancy. So being very careful when you hear somebody say that they're pregnant and it's early, while you want to be excited and you want to be happy for them, also just being aware of something can still happen right up until delivery and even afterwards. A big one with pregnancy loss is gender disappointment. Nobody thinks about that. A friend of mine who was pregnant, she has 4 boys at home. She found out she was pregnant and it was a total surprise. She announced it on Facebook that she was pregnant, and sure enough, she had before she had the miscarriage, she said, think pink, as though that was going to change what God had already created. Our own daughter, when she got pregnant, she wanted a girl. That's all she could think about, putting bows in their hair, putting lace on their socks, being able to take her to dance, being able to do girl stuff. And she found out she was having a boy. She was crushed. What am I going to do with a boy? Boys are dirty. Boys are stinky. Boys are loud. What am I going to do? Well, she survived, and she did very well. Then she got pregnant again. This is my girl. I just know it. We went to the ultrasound, and it was a boy. And she cried, and she cried. Another boy. How am I going to do this? They're dirty. They're stinky. But she has done a fabulous job in raising 2 boys. But it's interesting comments that are often said when you find a family who might have 2 boys, and someone will say, well, next time you can try for a girl. And she has another boy. Well, next time, maybe it'll be a girl. Next time. What's wrong with having a family full of boys or a family full of girls? Nothing. But when people voice their disappointments, it just can crush a couple. So please be aware that that can be considered a pregnancy loss. An ectopic pregnancy is one that you don't hear about too much. It can be very, very dangerous for a mother. It can be heart-wrenching. It will require surgery. And an ectopic pregnancy is when the fertilized egg attaches outside of the uterus. Sometimes it can be in the fallopian tube. Sometimes it can be on the fallopian tube. So if it's in the fallopian tube and doesn't come on down to the uterus, then if it's not caught early enough, it can create that tube to burst. Very painful, very scary, requires emergency surgery. And they lose one of their tubes. So that can be another devastating loss that a family can have. Another one is called a fatal diagnosis. You're at the doctor's office, and the doctor says, something's wrong. I don't hear a heartbeat. Or your baby may have a hole in its heart. Something is wrong that your baby is either going to die before it's born, shortly after it's born, maybe even months after it's born. But this child will not live a full life. So suddenly parents are thrown into this world where they're grieving their child. Their dreams, their hopes that they've had for this child is suddenly gone. When that baby is finally born, it adds another layer of grief. So they're having to deal with a double grief layer. Very hard. We cannot fix those things. Those things happen. So while a woman may be aware that something's going to happen, she has to prepare for two things. She still has to go through birth, and then she has to prepare for death. That creates a lot of trauma. Because I want to introduce you to Benjamin. I'm not supposed to move out of the way of the camera. Okay? Benjamin belongs to a friend of mine. She's also a doula. Benjamin weighed 2 pounds and 4 ounces. And he was 13 inches long. When Melanie found out that she was pregnant, she was shocked. She had a high schooler. How did this happen? She also had 4 other children, and now pregnant with another one. She went to the doctor at her 12-week visit. Everything looked great. But then suddenly at 17 weeks, her water breaks. So she's put on bed rest, and her bag of water somehow resealed, and the water was replaced. Amniotic fluid is sometimes referred to as just baby pee, okay? So it can refill. So she was on bed rest, and then they finally could see that there was fluid, and so she was able to get up, but needed to be very, very careful. She was 21 weeks. They decided you really should maybe be on limited bed rest, just to be safe. Their goal was to get to 24 weeks. All of a sudden, a week later, she starts bleeding heavily. They go to the ER. ER shows that the placenta has started to tear away from the uterine wall. Very dangerous. If it detaches completely, it's an emergency situation. Mom is immediately taken to the OR, knocked out, and a baby is out within seconds, practically. But because it wasn't a full tear, they were able to keep her in the hospital for a couple of days and that tear repaired itself. Thank you, Jesus. A week later, they had an ultrasound and found out they were having a boy. But somehow that fluid was gone again. She finally got to 24 weeks. That was the goal. 10 days later, 25 weeks, they decided it was time for her to be in the hospital. They needed to monitor her very closely because of all the issues that she had had. A week later, in the middle of the night, something happened, and she had to have an emergency C-section. She was put out. Baby Benjamin was taken immediately to the NICU unit. And because she had a C-section and was knocked out with general anesthesia, she had to come to and be able to gain her feeling back in her body and everything. And so it was a day almost, or several hours before they would put her in a wheelchair and take her to the NICU to see her son. He was tiny. He was really tiny. 30 hours after he was born, Benjamin passed away laying in the arms of his mama. His lungs were way too underdeveloped. Both of his lungs had punctures in them, and he had a blood infection. Because she had a C-section, she had to stay in the hospital for a couple more days. After she was released, she spiked a fever, a really high fever. They went back to the ER. What's happening? She had to tell her story over and over and over again to every nurse and every doctor that would come in the room to examine her. She had to relive that grief, the death of her child, the birth of her child, then the death of her child. It was devastating. It was an emotional roller coaster for her and her family. Luckily, her